In Ghana, two major government appointments have kicked off a huge national debate, forcing a really tough conversation about things like merit, morality, and whether the shadows of a private past should matter. So, let's get into what's really going on here.
And it really all boils down to this one central question. When it comes to public service, where do you draw the line between giving someone a second chance and, well, a permanent disqualification?
All right, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at the two appointments that got everyone talking. Then, we'll dig into the history of misconduct. We'll see how the nation is divided, explore this bigger question of redemption versus reckoning, and finally, take a look at what Ghanaians themselves are actually saying about it all.
Okay, so let's set the stage. What exactly kicked off this entire nationwide conversation? It all started with two key appointments made by the Mahama Administration. First up, in January of 2025, you have Professor Ransford Gyampo, who became the CEO of the Ghana Shippers Authority. Then, come November, the famous broadcaster Kwasi Kyei Darkwah, you probably know him as KKD, was named Special Envoy to the Caribbean. Now, these are big, important roles, but the thing is, both of these men carry very public and very controversial past. So, to really get why people are so fired up about this, you have to go back a bit. You have to understand the history. Let's take a closer look at the specific allegations that are casting a pretty long shadow over these two men. We'll start with KKD. Now, his case goes back about a decade, but believe me, it is still very fresh in a lot of people's minds.
Right, so back in 2015, KKD was charged with sexual assault. His side of the story was that the encounter was consensual. The prosecutors, on the other hand, argued it was forced. But the case never actually reached a verdict. The young woman involved withdrew, saying she wanted to avoid the trauma of the proceedings. So legally, the matter was closed. But in the court of public opinion, well, that's a different story. The questions never really went away.
Okay, now for the second appointee we mentioned, Professor Ransford Gyampo from the University of Ghana.
So his story dates back to 2019 when he was featured in a BBC documentary that was investigating sexual harassment. He was caught on camera making some really inappropriate proposals to a journalist who was undercover. The university did suspend him, but an internal investigation later brought him back, saying they found no evidence of a grades for sex kind of deal. For his part, Professor Gyampo has always maintained his innocence, claiming the whole thing was a political setup designed to ruin his reputation.
So, as you can probably guess, the news of these appointments just split public opinion right down the middle. It ignited an absolute firestorm online, in the media, everywhere.
And the debate really falls into two clear camps. On one side, you have supporters, like the analyst Arnold Asamoah-Badu, who argue we should focus on professional skills. They believe KKD, for example, will be great in his new role. But on the other side, you hear a very different argument from critics like filmmaker Amma K. Britter. They say a person's history is incredibly important, and they're asking what kind of message do these appointments send about accountability?
And that exact question was put into words so powerfully by Amelia Amamate. She's a former student who had actually accused Professor Gyampo of harassment in the past. Her words really get to the heart of what critics are feeling. This deep concern that these decisions are basically telling women that their experiences and their voices just aren't a priority.
You know, it's really important to zoom out for a second here. This conversation happening in Ghana, it's not happening in a bubble. It's actually part of a much bigger global discussion that's been going on about public figures and their past misconduct.
And this is what it all comes down to, this core conflict. It's the tension between a belief in personal redemption on one hand and the public's demand for a reckoning on the other. Do people deserve to move on from their pasts? Or does holding public office mean you have to meet a higher standard where certain actions can, and maybe should, never be forgotten?
We've seen this exact same tension just explode onto the world stage before. I mean, you probably remember this one, a huge case in the United States.
Yeah, during his confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh faced a sexual assault allegation from his high school years, brought forward by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. He denied everything and was eventually confirmed, but not before the entire nation was just gripped by this fierce debate over belief, over memory, and whether alleged actions from decades ago should stop someone from getting one of the highest jobs in the country.
So we've heard from the pundits, we've heard from public figures, but what about everyday Ghanaians? What do they actually think about all this?
Well, an anonymous survey by the Lavari Journal gives us a pretty clear snapshot, at least when it comes to KKD's appointment. And yeah, it's not even close. A huge majority of the people who responded disagreed with the decision.
And this comment from one of the people who took this survey, wow, it really captures the feeling of that majority. The idea that, regardless of any one person's professional skills, the top priority should be protecting victims, not making appointments that could look like you're rewarding alleged predators.
And so here we are. Ghana is left with this incredibly tough, unanswered question. It's not just a simple debate about redemption versus accountability. It goes so much deeper than that. It's really about what standards the nation is going to set for its leaders, and what kind of message those standards will send to all of its citizens for years to come.